The Jewish History Soundbites podcast with Yehuda Geberer. Immerse yourself in the rich tapestry of Jewish history as we explore fascinating tales and uncover hidden gems from our glorious past. Brought to you by our proud sponsor, Cross River, a leader at the intersection of financial services and technology, committed to empowering the communities they serve. Cross River's steadfast support fuels our mission to preserve our heritage and foster a vibrant future for all. Contact Cross River through their website at crossriver.com.
A date which will live in infamy.
Both
of those projects, initiatives, got off the ground because of the Ger Rebbe.
The 11 Olympic team members slain in West Germany. The Olympic Games.
Zugerecht waren Brüder in Amerika. Von 1000 Shabbos at the Skizar.
Out of the 24 who were killed were Americans who had come to learn in Hebron.
I say 1 million Jewish children who were made to be cut loose.
Whoever heard such beautiful words?
It is never Yehuda Geberer with Jewish History Soundbites, and this episode is part 2 of the secularization of the Jewish people in the modern era. We had part 1, which was quite successful, and if you're enjoying this series and Jewish History Soundbites, then maybe you can drop a rating, a review, and a 5-star rating on whatever platform you listen to it, and tell your friends and family. That's the best way to help the podcast. I do have, before I get to the podcast, I do have a trip coming up, a public trip. Spots are filling up, and so if you want to grab your spot, then make sure to get in touch with without this trip, this upcoming trip with the Lalechet company, and I am posting the link to subscribe to this trip in the show notes. The trip is between March 18th and 27th. You do not have to sign up for the entire trip. You can come for parts of it. We're going to be going to Poland and Hungary and Austria and Slovakia and Czech Republic. It's going to be a journey through Jewish history, a fascinating journey, very engaging, diverse, all kinds of different sites. I will be leading the trip, and it's with the Lalechet company, which is a very, very good company, very professional, and it'll be really, really a wonderful experience for all, a really nice journey. And I would love to meet you in person and have you along with me on this trip. So you can either email me for details, yehuda@yehudageberer.com, or you can email Lalechet, select@lalechet.com, I think. Should really have checked that first. But I will be posting the lalechet.com Europe Heritage Tour link in the show notes. I will also be in the New York area this coming week, a few weeks before the March trip. This coming week, the last week of February. And if you would like to have me come speak to your shul or community, then I'd be, or for Shabbos, scholar in residence, something like that, I'd be more than happy to do so. You can be in touch with me about that as well. Yehuda@yehudageberer.com. Those are the announcements, and now to today's second installment about the secularization of Jewish people. In part 1, we discussed at length about how the secularization of the Jewish people in the modern era took place due to external forces, changes in political systems and the emancipation, the economic changes, wars, revolutions, urbanization and the Industrial Revolution, immigration, things like that, and much less can be attributed, if anything at all, to internal Jewish movements such as Reform and Haskala, and things like that. Secularization of the Jewish people was due to the modernity, the modern era taking place. Now, due to the sensitive nature of the topic, so I got an enormous amount of feedback, huge volume, and great quality feedback as well. You know when people are really heated up and passionate about a topic when you get long voice notes. long voice notes. And I want to say that in my great gracious kindness, I listened to these long voice notes. But they're great, and I love hearing from you, and please keep sending me your feedback, whether you agree or not with what I said. In fact, especially if you disagree, love hearing dissent and other points of view. Now, a lot of it was great, and I definitely will qualify some of the things I say in today and in the coming episodes due to the feedback I received. But I want to say one thing. Everyone said, but maybe the Haskalah reform did do something, and perhaps we can speculate that they were the conduit through which secularization took place. Perhaps this allowed secularization, the fact that there were movements within the Jewish people that allowed more integration. So this gave people who were on the fence things like that. I got a lot of ideas were thrown at me from many wise and intelligent and engaged listeners, but almost none of them directly addressed all the proofs I brought from other countries that secularized without Haskalah and reform. England and France and Italy and the U.S. immigration at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th centuries, and colonialism in the Sephardic lands, North Africa, and the Middle East, where all the secularization took place, and it did not have any of this Haskalah and reform and other internal Jewish movements. So we see that it was modernity. No one addressed those proofs, except for one. One wise, very intelligent listener said something that I want to share because it's a very, very good point. Point is that he said was that all those countries, England, France, Italy, Amsterdam to a certain extent, North Africa and the Middle East, the American immigration, the immigration of Eastern European Jews to America, all those examples I brought were countries or places that had less educational infrastructure, less Torah leadership, less communal infrastructure, religious leadership, religious infrastructure. And since those places had less of that in the first place, it was easier to have secularization. Whereas Germany, Hungary, Galicia, Russia, Poland, Lithuania, all the countries of Eastern and Central Europe where Haskalah and reform did flourish, so those places had very strong rabbinical leadership, very strong religious infrastructure, very strong education, Torah education. And therefore, modernity, even though it made inroads, but would not have led to serious secularization had there not been internal Jewish movements such as Reform and Haskalah, which helped secularization along. That is one feedback that directly addressed the proofs that I brought. It's an interesting idea. I'm not sure how true it is, but it's definitely something that I can think about and look into and perhaps will address as we go along with this series. Another feedback almost touched on this in an indirect way. Another wise and intelligent listener made a distinction between the masses versus the elite. The masses of the Jewish people, mostly uneducated masses of the Jewish people, they secularized because of modernity, because of the modern era, because of all these external factors. However, the elite youth in yeshivas, in the kahal positions, they secularized only because of the internal Jewish movements, the Reform and the Haskalah. Interesting idea also. Again, all these things are worth exploring, and it's very, very interesting. Now, due to the large volume of feedback on the specific topic of the Orthodox establishment's response to modernity, or rather, the religious rabbinical establishment's response to modernity, which developed and evolved into Orthodoxy. So I plan on discussing and addressing this topic later on in this series, but I think it's best if we go out of order and deal with it now in this episode, since so many listeners' feedback requested clarification about this vital topic about the religious establishment's response to the modern era. So let's summarize what we already know, both from the last podcast and in general, things that we just already know in life. Not everything. Number one, we proved that the modern era was the primary engine of secularization. External forces of the modern era, big, broad trends that were changing in the modern era, like I said, politically, economically, socially, culturally, migrations, wars, and things like that. Technological advancements. I imagine that the invention of the railroad caused more secularization in the Jewish people than all reform and Haskala combined. Just one technological advancement. Simple things like that. All these external forces. Whereas the internal Jewish movements like reform and Haskala, Neolog movement in Hungary, things like that, did very little, if anything, to cause secularization. That's fact number one that we know. The second thing is that we also know, we're just summarizing what we know at this point, at the same time that secularization was spreading, there were these internal Jewish movements which emerged in specific countries. Germany, certain parts of Central Europe like Prague and Vienna, Galicia, Russia, Hungary, in the form of Haskala, reform, Neolog. Neolog was like the Hungarian reform. Anyways, these movements were new movements of the modern era to redefine Jewish identity in the modern era. These were not assimilation, or neither. It was not assimilation on one hand. It was also not traditional religious, halachic Jewish observance of the pre-modern era on the other hand. It was something new. New Jewish identity for the modern era. And each of these movements offered something new, some new proposal for Jewish identity in the modern era. That's another thing that we know. And what this podcast is positing and claiming is that these new movements had very little, if any, effect on the secularization of the Jewish people. Okay. Now, the next thing we know is that the challenges and new realities of the modern era continue to develop throughout the 18th and 19th centuries and early 20th centuries. And the secularization continues, both in countries where internal Jewish movements developed and in countries where they were absent. Holland, England, France, Italy, U.S. immigration, the immigration to the United States, North Africa, and the Middle East, the colonialism. Secularization continues unabated, increases exponentially through the 20th century in all those places. Okay? The next thing we know is that the non-Jewish, primarily Christian Europe was also going through a process of secularization during this very same time. Amazing coincidence. Presumably, and this is another proof to my whole thesis, it was due to the same factors which led to Jewish secularization, namely the modern era. So the fact that Christian Europe was secularizing during this very same time is very, very important to keep in mind in the background. So nothing, Haskala didn't affect Christian Europe, right? Neither did Reform Judaism. The modern era did. So if we would follow the trend, which seemed to be, the next thing, this is the next point in the summary. If we would follow the trend, which seemed to be a deterministic, linear path perceived by the people living at that time, that during this age of reason, of science, emancipation, enlightenment, etc., 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 so the theory was at the time by the, again, non-Jews, Christian Europe, the way they looked around in the 18th and 19th centuries, it would seem that in a very deterministic, linear way, that religion would soon disappear altogether from the modern world. Religion, completely. Again, we're talking primarily about Christianity in European society. Religion was to be viewed as a vestige of the Middle Ages, when the church reigned supreme and religion defined the identity of the average European, as well as European society as a whole in the Middle Ages. But that's all to the Middle Ages. But today, in the age of reason and science and emancipation and enlightenment, religion is going to disappear. That was what it seemed. That's what seemed to be the trend. And something surprising happened. Again, we're still in European general Christian society. We'll get back to Jewish society in Europe soon enough. No worries. And in very unusual turn of events, something very surprising happened in the 18th and 19th centuries, that there's this great religious awakening in Christian Europe in the 18th century. Just when everyone was predicting that it was only a matter of time before religion would disappear altogether due to the changes of the modern era. And I'll give you a few examples of this religious awakening in Christian Europe and in other places. The evangelical revival in England, pietism and reformed Protestantism in continental Europe. Now, of course, Americans are likely more familiar with the American versions of this, which is the same exact time period. The first and later second Great Awakenings, which was a religious revival movement in America, first in the American colonies, the first Great Awakening. The second Great Awakening was already the United States of America in the late 1700s, early 1800s. By the way, the Jews had their version of this even before secularization. Even before secularization became prevalent, there was a revivalist religious movement in the Jewish people of Eastern Europe in the 1700s. Anyone know what this movement was? It's called the Hasidic movement. That's a whole nother story. We'll get to that too. So essentially what we have here is a very, very surprising phenomenon. In European general Christian society, number one, we have the modern era. Modern era leads to number two, secularization. And number three, religion responds. What does religion respond by doing? Renewing itself, making itself relevant, and enjoying a resurgence. So what it seems is that we have this fascinating phenomenon that religion is able to respond to the modern era by renewing itself, by making itself relevant in the modern era, and by enjoying a resurgence even in the modern era. Against all odds, against all the predictions that religion's going to disappear, Christian religion, I'm talking about in Europe, experiences a resurgence. Why is that so important? Why am I talking so much about Christian Europe? Because what's so astounding is that the Jews in Europe experience almost the exact same thing. Shockingly, Jewish history does not take place in a vacuum. The Jewish history also experienced the change. Jewish communities of Europe experienced the changes of the modern era. And due to the changes in the modern era, they experienced secularization. And religion did not disappear. Not only were there new forms of religion, such as reform, but the traditional religion, the religious religion, the Orthodoxy, experiences a resurgence and revitalization when it developed a new form specifically to address the needs and defenses against the challenges of the new modern era. And that's the rise of Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy as a movement to respond to the challenges of the modern era. The Orthodox response to the modern era. That's this resurgence of religion within the Jewish people. Religion doesn't disappear. Now, if this sounds like a deterministic view of history in general, and Jewish history included, then I have to confess to this sin. I have a very deterministic view of history. So much so that I even prefer the Hebrew term for deterministic, which is tahalich bilti nimna, a process which is impossible to prevent from happening. That's the literal translation. That's deterministic. Because I see that there's huge societal factors involved, that the general course of history is deterministic. So secularization process is deterministic, and religion's surviving and flourishing of orthodoxy were natural courses of events in history that had to happen of the modern era. Both are natural byproducts of the modern era and should not surprise us. And this is, among other things, the development of orthodoxy. Orthodoxy as a modern movement. Now, before I proceed, I need to make a very, very clear disclaimer or caveat. Religious Jewish observance, what do I mean by orthodoxy as a modern movement? I know a lot of people will be turned off from that term. What do you mean? Orthodoxy is 3,000 years old from Matan Torah at Har Sinai. Well, what I mean is that religious observance of the Torah, keeping Shabbos, the basic halachic framework, that you could say has not fundamentally changed for millennia. Religious Jewish observance in the traditional sense with a basic halachic framework has not fundamentally changed for millennia. The basic idea of following the written and oral Torah as expressed in the Gemara in Shas and later centuries in the Shulchan Aruch, and the basic idea of observing Shabbos and Kashrus and similar halachas and mitzvahs has not fundamentally changed for millennia. In that sense, religious Judaism, in the traditional sense, is not a modern movement. That's not what I'm talking about. It's similar observance of halacha as had been practiced prior to the modern era. But Orthodoxy, as a modern movement, is a modern movement. What do I mean by that? It's Orthodoxy, the birth of Orthodoxy in the late 18th and early 19th centuries in different parts of Europe, in the Chassam Sofer and Reb Shamshon Raphael Hirsch in Eastern Europe and Hasidic Galicia and other places. There's the Orthodoxy as a traditional movement that uses modern tools to respond to modern challenges, to defend religion, to become a system of defense against the modern era, that religion should survive. That's what I mean by Orthodoxy. Modern movement, I'm going to explain exactly what I mean. I want to start with a funny story from contemporary Judaism, and I only mean it as a humorous anecdote, so don't take it the wrong way. Right here in my neighborhood in Ramat Beit Shemesh, a few years ago, 10 years ago, I don't remember how long it was. I only live here 10 years, so it had to be within the last 10 years. And it's Purim time now, so this time of year, the local tzedakah organization always tried, every year, till today, they still try, to make the campaign, the tzedakah campaign around Purim, to be funny and fun and exciting and happy. And they always choose a theme that will make it exciting. And like the weeks leading up to Purim, they put up signs all over town and all kinds of paraphernalia that like hint at the theme. And everyone starts guessing, oh my God, what it's going to be this year. It's going to be so funny. What are they doing? And they lead up to it, and then they drop another hint a few days later, and then all of a sudden they burst out with this really fun theme and exciting, and everyone gets to give the tzedakah for Purim. That's how the local tzedakah organization runs their campaign. Okay, so a bunch of years ago, the way they did it is that they spread rumors around, or signs, I don't remember how they did it, with a kind of like it's what it sounded like from the rumors and the signs was that a Starbucks coffee is going to open up in Ramat Beit Shemesh, which would be wonderful, by the way. There still isn't any, but that a Starbucks coffee shop is going to open up in Ramat Beit Shemesh. Okay. And everyone started spreading these rumors, and you know how rumors spread. As soon as they had details, which property they got, when's it going to be open, what are they going to be serving there, how many seating are they going to have, and the whole thing wasn't true. The point was that they were making a Starbucks themed tzedakah campaign. The theme was called Give Bucks. Give Bucks, not Starbucks. In other words, give money, dollars, right? Give bucks. And they used the Starbucks, colors, green, and their insignia, and maybe not exactly their insignia. They could be, infringement, whatever. But you know what I mean. They used a Starbucks type of theme for their campaign, and it was all around this slogan of "Give bucks to your neighbors" and everything. Now that only came out 3 days before Purim, because the 2 weeks before that, they're leading up to it, and they're building up the excitement and building up the guessing game and all that. So everyone in the meantime doesn't realize that it's a Give Bucks tzedakah campaign. They think that a Starbucks coffee shop is actually going to open. Why am I saying this whole silly story to all of you listeners who couldn't care less about tzedakah campaigns in Ramat Beit Shemesh from a bunch of years ago? Because the Orthodox establishment, the rabbinical establishment here in Beit Shemesh, heard that a modern Starbucks coffee shop is going to open up in this Haredi Shchuna, in this very religious neighborhood, and they put out a whole thing against it. They banned it, and you're not allowed to send your kids there, and it's going to be open late at night, and we're putting it in Cherem, and it's going to be a hangout, and who says it's going to be kosher, and what type of hashgacha is going to be there, and what are they going to serve, and this goyish company is coming into our little small Haimish neighborhood, and they literally put out an entire campaign against it. Now, it hadn't opened yet. Not only hadn't opened, it wasn't even opening. This was a tzedakah campaign called Give Bucks. But this was the rumor. The rumor was that they're going to have a coffee shop open. And so why is that related to today's story? That's the end of the story. So why is that related to today's topic? Because that's Orthodoxy as a modern movement. Orthodoxy as a modern movement is the modern era is a threat. It's our way of life, our traditional lifestyle, and we have to view everything through that prism. Our leadership, our media, our even having a media is a modern mechanism. So we're borrowing components from the modern era in Orthodoxy. That's a major component of it, like politics, like media, like technology, like all these things. Organizational, educational, right? We borrow all these education, the way we run schools and yeshivas and everything is all modern mechanisms of education. We use that to strengthen our religious life, our traditional life. But not only that, the whole idea of Orthodoxy in the modern era is creating boundaries, creating red lines, defining ourselves by who we're not. We're not this. We don't do this. In our community, we don't accept this. This is a danger. This is a threat to our way of life. We don't do this. This is not our value system. We don't mix with this. We don't do that. This is outside. This is not what a Ben Torah does. This is not what a chassid does. We dress differently. We do differently. We don't mix with the modern world. We have to be very, very careful. And anything that's new has to be viewed with suspicion. This is not our tradition. This is not the custom of our community. Why is it coming in? Why is it coming in now? And that becomes a very reactive, defensive community. They used to say about, just as another example, about the Agudas Yisrael political party in Poland, in pre-war Poland. Now again, for the Orthodox establishment to have a political party with votes in the Polish Sejm is because Orthodoxy is a modern movement. They take politics and say, okay, political systems and parties and voting and all that and lobbying is the modern way of doing things, not having the rich guy go to the Poritz as a shtadlin and bribing him so that there's no gzeira against the Jewish community as it was in the pre-modern era, but we use politics. So we're using, modern tools to get results. So therefore, that's using modernity. So that's step number one, using modernity to protect the religious community, to protect the religious values and education and the traditional halachic observance and the protection of the communities. That's a defense mechanism. So using modernity for that. But not only that, what they used to say about Agudas Yisrael in pre-war Poland, and whether we'll say that about Agudas Yisrael after the war in the modern state of Israel, that I don't want to get controversial, so I won't say anything. But in pre-war Poland, they used to say about the Agudas Yisrael, what was their political platform? They didn't have a political platform. They waited for other political parties to say something, and then they said, we're against that, right? So their platform was to be against whatever everyone else is for, right? It's a very reactive, defensive type of a philosophy almost. It's a way, and it, by the way, it worked. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. The system worked. The Orthodoxy flourished and grew and is experiencing growth and everything about it. This Orthodoxy is a modern movement, both two-pronged as a modern movement. Number one, as it uses tools of the modern era for its own benefit, media, technology, politics, education, like I said before, and many, many, many other examples. They use modern systems and incorporates elements of modernity in a way to protect the community. That's the first prong. And the second prong of Orthodoxy as a modern movement, and I think it's much more important to the identity of Orthodoxy in the modern era, from the Chassam Sofer until this very day, is that it's a reactive, it's a defensive, it's drawing red lines, it's building walls, it's creating these boundaries, defining themselves by who they're not. This is not how we do it. We do it this way. This is the custom. This is new, so it's outside of the what's permitted and what's part of our value system and our tradition. So that's the two-pronged defense, and that's why Orthodoxy is a modern movement. So what made it a successful modern movement? That Orthodoxy in the modern era defines itself as a defense mechanism against modernity, or maybe not against is too strong of a word. We'll say to confront the challenges of modernity. It's a very, very, very modern way of looking at it. And that's why Orthodoxy is a product of the modern era. And that's why Orthodoxy succeeded in the modern era. Because it saw the dangers and saw the threats. Now, we will get to what they were fighting against, because most of Orthodoxy responded to the internal Jewish movements, much more than modernity at large. And that's for obvious reasons. I mean, it's much easier to point to a specific enemy within the community. Enemy, or I don't know, enemy is also a strong word. We won't say enemy. God forbid, we'll say the other, or the boundaries, the red lines, the defense, the protection of the community. It's much easier when it's saying this and not that. It's much harder to say, well, the government made emancipation and all of us have equal rights now, and now we're equal citizens, and therefore we need to be careful about... Well, they did say that, by the way. Many of them spoke about emancipation as a challenge of the modern era. But it's much more broad, it's much more gradual, it's much more subtle, it's much more external. Here, it's much easier to see from within that, oh, these are modern movements. This is a danger. This is a threat to our community. Our way of life is not like this. Our way of life is to protect and to create these boundaries and to look within. So that's why it was primarily primarily confronting the challenges from these internal Jewish movements such as Reform and Haskala, and much less so against these broad expressions of the modern era, such as political change, economic change, urbanization, wars, immigration, all these things, which are much more subtle and much more external and much more big. Too big to either comprehend or too big to confront, even if it is comprehended in real time. I want to just talk about a few examples. Reb Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, who's almost the classic, him and the Chassam Sofer are probably the most two classic rabbinical leaders who confronted the modern era head on, even though there are many more. Reb Shamshon Raphael Hirsch did not develop his philosophy of Torah and Derech Eretz in his study, and then because he saw that this is the correct Torah way and this is the only Torah way, and then he said, hey, community, let me implement top down from the communal elite and the communal leadership, the rabbinical leadership. This is the way we got to view the Torah from now on. That's not how it happens. It's not He saw how German Jewry was integrating into general society. He saw the modern era. He saw, and again, mostly the internal Jewish movements. Again, because that's Orthodoxy in the modern era, is defending from these internal confrontations, these internal conflicts with changes in the system, in the traditional system, and he sees German Jewry it's happening there, and he says, hey, we can provide a Torah-oriented framework for it. In other words, it was a reaction. It's a reaction to the general behavior of the people. Leadership is reactionary. It's not initiative. The people take the initiative. And leadership responds by saying, okay, let's give it a framework. The changes that are happening, let's try to give it a legitimate Torah framework that would work in the modern era. In other words, it's bottom-up, grassroots, social trends, and the leadership reacts to it in a defensive posture. The Chassam Sofer, another perfect example, he did not develop Chadash Asr Min HaTorah as his rallying cry against the confrontations in the modern era, mostly, again, the internal challenges, and then implemented top-down. That's not what happened. He reacted. He was reacting as a defense mechanism against these challenges of the modern era. Internal, to a lesser extent, the external ones. The same with the changes in the Hasidic leadership in Russia, Galicia, and Poland during the 19th century. Many examples of Hasidic leadership confronting these challenges over the course of the 19th century. The Tzemach Tzedek of Chabad, the third Rebbe of Chabad, Divrei Chaim of Tzanz, many others. The same thing with the Lithuanian rabbinical establishment. Even not rabbinical establishment, even Lithuanian activists, Orthodox activists, such as Yaakov Lifshitz of Kovna, the secretary of Rebbe Yitzchak Elchanan Spector, or Rebbe Eliyahu Akiva Rabinovich in Poltava, who was also a fighter and used the media. Both of these individuals, they used the media. They used the modern era. The yeshivas were like that. Oh, these modern Lithuanian yeshivas were products of the modern era and incorporated elements, and the Musar movement, which infiltrated those yeshivas at the end of the 19th century, they were utilizing tools of the modern era to confront the challenges and to build walls. The yeshiva is the tevas noyach, it's to hold against the modern era and the threats. And the maskilim are not going to grab the elite of our youth because the Torah is going to become attractive, and the Musar movement is going to make it attractive to the youth, and they're going to confront those. And again, what they're seeing is the internal movements. Now, why is Orthodoxy as a modern movement responding much more to internal movements? And how did that struggle create Orthodoxy in the modern era? And much less so to the massive external changes which were impacting the Jewish people and causing secularization, right? So we know, by now we're all educated, we know that secularization was being caused by the external changes, the modern era changes, the emancipation, the political changes, the economic changes, the urbanization, the industrial revolution, the wars, the revolutions, the industrial revolution, the immigration, technological developments of all kinds. That's what caused secularization. Now, for the most part, Orthodoxy as a modern movement is responding primarily to the internal movements of the Jewish people. The Chassam Sofer and Morsor of Hirsch is responding to reform, Chassam Sofer to Haskala and reform. Later on, the Talmidim of the Chassam Sofer is to the Neolog, the Hungarian version of reform in Hungary in the 19th century. In Eastern Europe, they're responding to Haskala. It's all about Haskala. Why are they all responding to these internal movements when we know that what was causing secularization was these external changes of the modern era? And the answer is very simple. This is what's inside the community. This is what's visible, tangible. It's obvious. It's in front of the face. It works, and that struggle creates orthodoxy, because what you're saying is, you're trying to redefine a Jew for the modern era, that you can have reform, that you can have, the Chassam Sofer, for instance, is fighting against rabbis who are implementing halachic changes. Now, if you think about it, you say, if we could go back in time and with our 2020 hindsight, if we would want to give some advice to the Chassam Sofer, if I had that opportunity, and by the way, even if I had the opportunity, I wouldn't do it because I wouldn't have the chutzpah to say anything to the Chassam Sofer. But I'm talking about hypothetically, I would tell him, hey, don't waste your energies fighting with rabbis implementing halachic changes. It's a waste of your time and energy. You know why? Because who cares? Almost no one cares about rabbis who make halachic changes, because secularization is happening. Within 30 years, not a single secular Jew in the entire Austro-Hungarian Empire could care less about Aaron Churin, who's the main rabbi that the Chassam Sofer fought with, that he permitted a certain type of fish that you're allowed to eat, and it was very controversial at the time, right? Or other changes or even the Chassam Sofer's big fight against the placement of the bima in the Neolog temples or shuls, whatever you want to call them, synagogues, or the Reform temples in Germany. One of the big fights was they put the bima up the front, and the Orthodox shuls, the bima was in the center, and this was like a war about where the bima was. If I would say again, and I'm being facetious here, I wouldn't say it, but say, why fighting over the bima? Secularization is happening because of all these external forces, and if secularization is happening, then it doesn't matter where the bima is, because no one's coming to shul anyway. They're all going to assimilate and later intermarry within a couple of generations. They're all going to. Who cares? And the idea is that this is visible. This is the struggle within. This is not these huge external changes that are hard to perceive and are very subtle. Economic changes and urbanization, and they're very sophisticated, broad changes. This is something I can see. This is something I can confront. And rallying my community around this. We are Orthodox. We don't do this. We don't make these changes. This is our red line. This is our defense. These are our customs. These are our values. We don't do things differently. This is who we are, and we're proud of who we are, and we're going to educate our children in this way. That's what creates orthodoxy in the modern era, and as a modern movement, because they're responding to modern things, and they're utilizing the modern era and elements of modernity, incorporating it, including language also, by the way, in many places. Start to speak German, Hungarian, and later Yiddish is dropped in other places as well. So that's another element that's incorporated from the modern era. So we use modern era. We also make modernity about the orthodoxy in the modern era being a defense mechanism, standing against. Where's my red lines? What am I against? What am I? Who am I not? I'm not like that. I'm not like that person, that community, that value system, that thing. I'm making it sound more divisive than it really was. I'm trying to just create drama and bring out a point here, obviously. I'm not trying to create divisiveness, and for sure not any hatred or, God forbid, anything like that. I'm just trying to bring out a point about how Orthodoxy responded, how it flourished, how it grew, and how it experienced a revitalization and resurgence in the modern era, because now you have something to rally around. Now you have something to fight for. Oh, I'm Orthodox. I don't subscribe to the modernity. I don't subscribe to these changes. I don't subscribe to this is who I am. And that gives religion another chance. That gives Orthodoxy a chance to grow and to flourish. Now, we have a lot more to talk about. I didn't cover everything yet. We have at least 2 more episodes. And don't worry, I'm going to get to all of it. So don't think I'm like cutting it off in the middle of the topic. And we will get back to, I'm not sure if I'm going to be in the United States next week. I might be busy. I don't know if we'll have an episode next week. But for sure, we'll get back to this topic. We're going to continue with this series. We have a lot more to talk about, and I'm very, very excited. I'm also excited for our upcoming trip to Europe. So make sure you sign up for that as well. Looking forward to seeing you on our trip in March. This is Yehuda Geber, Jewish History Soundbites. You can reach me at yehuda@yehudageber.com for questions, comments, sources, tours, trips, sponsorships, and lectures. You can subscribe to Jewish History Soundbites on your favorite podcast platform, and I hope you enjoyed.